My name is Rich Rocket, but we're going to get to a little more on that later. Right now, I want to tell you about the people that we've partnered with to make this happen. We've partnered with the Waverly Street Foundation to uplift some amazing organizations that are doing important work for our community, in our community. I want to bring out my friend Alex. Y'all make some noise for Alex. Big noise, big noise.
Rich.
Big noise for Alex.
Thanks, Rich. I think I'm on, right? I'm on? So good to see y'all. As Rich said, my name is Alex McBride. I am a strategy director at Waverly Street Foundation. And Waverly Street is a foundation that is joining the fight against climate change. We do that by supporting amazing organizations and movement leaders that are on the front lines of climate change movements every day. These leaders also help us to reimagine a new future, one where we all have access to clean air and clean water, where we all have a right to housing and health care, and where we all can celebrate our Blackness, our uniqueness, and our joy. So I'm so excited that over the next few days, you're gonna hear from these leaders who inspire the work I do at Waverly Street every day, and I know will inspire you all. And I'm so excited to start the conversation and bring out Miss Melissa Noel, who is an award-winning international journalist, a host, and a media entrepreneur. She's also a fellow Howard Bison. And I just want to share a little bit more about Melissa's distinguished career in television news and digital media, and her work that centers on reporting issues impacting the global Black diaspora and developing and managing strategic content partnerships across North America and the Caribbean. Melissa's a successful entrepreneur and also the founder and director of Mel and N Media, connecting diaspora brands to the world. She's a first-generation Guyanese American with over 13 years of reporting and production experience and has made a proven impact at the intersections of media, entrepreneurship, and social impact. Melissa? All right, y'all, have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. How you doing? Come on, I know we could do better than that. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Fantastic. So I have the pleasure now of introducing our amazing panelists who are already here, but I'm going to take a minute and stand up and introduce them properly before we take a seat here. We're having a really important conversation today. So first I want to introduce Colette Pichon-Battle, who is a climate activist and lawyer, as well as founder of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. She is the Vision and Initiatives Partner for Taproot Earth. Welcome, Colette. Thank you so much for joining us. I also have Mike Harrington, who is the Sustainability Engagement Director at the Tishman Center, acting as the main liaison between all university departments and offices implementing projects that further the new school's sustainability and environmental justice efforts. Welcome, Mike. So what we want to start off by saying this afternoon is that despite what we may hear, there's a lot of information coming at us from so many different sources every single day. Climate change is real. And the rising numbers of catastrophic natural events are a direct result of rising temperatures and the impacts that these events have. And these events are felt even more in communities of color. Climate change impacts fall disproportionately on communities of color who are least able to prepare for, recover from, and recover from. And the impacts are being felt across the diaspora. So today, we're having a real conversation, a family conversation about the impacts of climate change on the diaspora and also the things we could do about it, because it's not just about problems, but about the solutions also. So once again, I want you guys to please clap it up for our panelists right here who are gonna really drop some gems this afternoon for us. So I wanna get right into this conversation, Mike and Colette. Climate change, as I just mentioned, disproportionately impacts communities of color. It's a statement so many of us have heard and read about, but what does that actually mean? What kind of health impacts does climate change pose to Black communities, particularly where air quality is concerned and in the aftermath of these extreme weather events that we continue to see so consistently and regularly now? And Colette, I'll have you start.
Thank you so much, and peace, everyone. I just want to, before I answer the question, give my peace and gratitude to the Lenape Nation, coming in from Cherokee territory, Choctaw territory in Southeast Louisiana. Just want to make sure we honor the land that we're on. And I really appreciate this question about what the impacts are, because most Black folks aren't really thinking about the climate impacts that we don't talk about. So we'll talk about hurricanes, we'll talk about big storms, we'll talk about fires even. But the biggest threat to Black folks and the biggest threat to poor folks is actually going to be heat and temperature rise. And it's not going to be because we don't know what to do. It's going to be because we have to choose between paying an energy bill and saving our lives. I watch folks who are used to sleeping outside or opening a window or waiting for things to cool down at night. But we're seeing over the last 5 years, temperatures at nighttime not get down low enough for the human body to actually cool down. And so what happens if you're poor? You don't run your air condition. You choose not to have a higher bill, and then you have a bad situation. This isn't just about the storms, and I do want to acknowledge that we are at the 18th year since Hurricane Katrina. I don't know if y'all remember that moment, but that was a moment that really catalyzed me, and it opened the eyes of a lot of people. Those storms are the warning shots, but the other things that are coming our way are much more quiet. They will creep on us. We won't be ready for them. Heat and access to fresh water, we're talking about basic things for human life, and they are at threat. They're being threatened today, and we have to really get a handle on that.
And Mike, I'd like for you to add to that as well. What does it really mean when we say that climate change disproportionately impacts communities of color, particularly Black people? What does this mean in our everyday lives?
Well, there's a lot of smaller things like heat, like Colette mentioned, but then if we look at even in New York and New Jersey, there's a part of the South Bronx where the asthma rates are extremely high, and it's disproportionately people of color, disproportionately Black people that live in those areas. You look at New Jersey, for example. We're doing some work and research at the Tishman Center that showed almost 85% of the, I want to say 85% of the power plants are in communities of color. So when you have power plants, you have pollution, you have all of these particulate matter that are going in these neighborhoods and giving people asthma, giving people cancer, lupus, all these other things that me and my family members all have. It really starts to add up. And then there's another part of that public health that I don't think comes up in America, which is gun violence, which is a problem in our whole country. But anything that happens to the whole country is exacerbated in communities of color. And a lot of that can be tied to climate change. As some reporting I've recently seen says that when it's hotter, there is more violence. And so when you concentrate that in urban areas where most Black people live, especially in the northeast and central part of the U.S., that is a public health emergency, and it's not really talked about enough.
I think the correlations that each of you draw here are really important, because sometimes, as you said, we think about the bigger things, but not those little things that can really add up and impact us in so many ways. And just those simple examples that you provided, having to choose between having a higher energy bill or running your air condition, is something that many of us have to think about. Or sometimes, as you said, it's summertime, it's hot, people have a lot of things on their mind, a lot going on, but you may not stop to think about how that can, that the non-ability to be able to do something about it can actually lead to other things. The asthma rates in particular that you mentioned, and that so many communities of color are in neighborhoods, as you mentioned, that are surrounded by things that make us sick. So then, Mike, I want to ask a follow-up there. So why is a focus on this correlation that both you and Colette just mentioned? Why is this so important right now? What is the growing importance that we need to take and push forward when it comes to paying attention to the correlation between climate change and health?
I would say because, well, this year alone, every month has been hotter than the last. And it's like that trend is likely going to continue. So we're going to see more heat. So when you see more heat, those impacts may grow exponentially. So we really need to be thinking about solutions to this stuff now, because it's going to unfortunately, it's going to keep getting worse. But there are solutions that are out there, and a lot of those solutions exist. A lot of people that are very creative in EJ communities have been working on solutions that work, that are not extractive and are very much community-based and focused. So I think looking at this stuff now to prevent future catastrophe, I think that's what we have to look at.
And we're certainly going to touch on solutions in this conversation. As we said, this is not just going to be about the problems and the issues. We'll also touch on solutions. So Colette, I want to come over to you now. You mentioned 18 years since Hurricane Katrina. We know that so many people had to leave their homes. Some have returned, some have not. And the lasting impact that has had on our country and so many people. So when we talk about climate change, how does climate change impact our culture? How we as Black people gather, celebrate, and live? And you could use that as an example, but please feel free to add more there too.
Yeah, Hurricane Katrina really opened a lot of people's eyes to what was going on, but it was really when the BP oil drilling disaster happened 5 years later that I began to make the connection between oil and gas drilling and the storms and the extreme weather that are going to come because of that. And what we know over these 18 years of recovery is that the impact has been just really indescribable. We lost our culture. Folks who come to New Orleans now, folks who come to South Louisiana now, are seeing a rebuilt and often over-commodified version of our culture. What is happening? Well, everything gets taken away. Everything goes away when there's a big weather event. And then folks come in and take it, they make it something marketable, usually based on some sort of charity, let's go help out over there. But what's happening to the authentic culture is that it is slowly dying. And I mentioned New Orleans, but it's important that I mention the coastal areas of the entire Gulf South, because we're losing land at one of the fastest rates on the planet in South Louisiana. And when you lose land, you lose place. When you lose place, you lose people. And when you lose people, you lose the culture. And that's what's happening, not just in South Louisiana, but around the globe. And most of us in the United States aren't paying attention to the fact that we're losing land due to sea level rise that is part of a climate crisis. Most of us are having to deal with the struggles of every day, that we think that the climate conversation is for the other people tomorrow. But this is about us today. And what's happening to our culture is that it's being slowly taken away from us. And that's just when the land disappears. When you have to move, like thousands of people had to do after Hurricane Katrina, to another place. You live in Houston, you live in Atlanta, you live in Memphis. That's not New Orleans. Those are very different places. You lose your culture, you assimilate into a new culture, and then those very unique things that people went to New Orleans for are gone. And this is what's happening everywhere. Our culture is not just for commodification. It's actually what can save us. In places like South Louisiana, when you have loss, you do a thing. You do a ritual. You do a prayer. You do a dance. You do a movement. What happens when we don't know how to deal with loss anymore because we've lost that culture? Well, now we're suffering with mental health effects that people have to go get drugged for. We used to have culture that would take care of this kind of stuff. This is what happens to us. This is not just about polar bears. This is about us surviving, using those authentic things that are for us to survive. And we're losing that because of the climate crisis. And it's time for us, especially Black folks, to wake up and see that we are a part of this conversation and we are a part of the solution.
Please clap it up for that right there. I think that was really, really a point that we thought was really important to make in this conversation, because oftentimes we're not thinking about what we're losing as a people, what binds us together, what connects us, and as you said, what allows us to heal, right? So being able to use culture instead of going toward medicines or any other things to get through and get by. So Mike, I want to know if you have anything to add to this as well, because this was one of the things that I know really touch so many of us as culture. And how is that being impacted by climate change right here? And what are some of the things that people are doing to help turn the tide where that is concerned?
Well, I think with a lot of art, it does reflect our culture, and you will see it in very subtle ways. You may hear rap songs where people are talking about, their jewelry is cold. It's cold, like cold. It's like less cold because of climate change. It's like you'll hear all these like small things, but then there's also a bit of it's reflected in a lot of visual art. Like one of my favorite photographers is LaToya Ruby Frazier, and she did this incredible book called The Notion of Family, about how climate change affected her and her family in Pennsylvania. And it's a really moving work, and she's now working, she just recently finished a book about Flint, about Black environmental justice organizers in Flint, and then the role culture plays into that. And now this has basically turned her into someone who wants to organize around this issue. She wants to use her platform and her camera and her notoriety to really talk about how climate change is affecting specifically Black people in the United States and across the world. So that's sort of making these images visible and very clear to understand, and then also being unapologetically Black about it. I think that's really powerful to see from her. And there's other people working like that, but that's someone that came to mind when you asked that question.
Yeah, and I love that you said making it visible, right? For people to understand. What we're doing today is making it visible by hearing from these two climate activists who are doing the work, right? You've been in the spaces, you've been doing the work. And so we know the how, right? We know what's happening. We have a little background, but now I want to know the why. Like, what actually got each of you into doing this kind of work? What was it that sparked the interest in getting involved and being active and not just saying, okay, well, I can do something, but I'm not sure? What sparked the interest, and how can you share just a little bit about that journey for others who may be wanting to do the same? And I can start with you, Mike.
For me, I'm originally from Chicago, but I live in New York now. And the neighborhood I'm from, there's a lot of factories, paint factories. There's a lot of industry there. So like I grew up, I was always sick. Most of my family was sick, and I didn't know why. But I do remember being very alarmed when I found out that if you don't recycle, it's bad for the earth. So I made my whole household collect every single newspaper that we had. And then since there was no recycling facilities near me, my mother would have to get up at 7 a.m. on Saturday, drive me down to the recycling facility just to drop off these papers that her little 6-year-old kid kept complaining about. So, like, that's how I really started. But then once I learned more about what environmental racism is, and like the injustice impacts of that, and after I started doing organizing in communities and realizing how big this problem is, I was like, well, I have to work on this for the rest of my life. Like, I don't think there's a bigger issue that affects all of us, and then the way that it unjustly impacts other people based on arbitrary factors, like, it's just so unfair. So I think what really drives that is my sense of justice and trying to correct a wrong I saw.
Yeah, and I think for me, I've been driven by the sense of our Black power. I come from the bayous of South Louisiana, and every morning I take a walk, and then after my walk, I go out to see the alligators. And I just go to make sure that these creatures that have been here since before the dinosaurs are still there. And I see them in the morning, and they remind me of survival, and they remind me of resilience, and they remind me of power, and they remind me of Black people. I mean, look at us in this country. What have we gone through? So much, and we've still survived. We're really powerful beings, and right now in this climate moment, we are going to need the knowledge of people who have survived. It is not going to be the pontifications of the privilege that get us to survival. It's going to be the lived experiences of all of these cultures, indigenous folks, Black folks that have survived the ultimate atrocities of humankind. Because that's what climate change is. It's an atrocity of humankind. This is man-made, y'all. This is not a natural system. Don't believe that stuff. This is man-made. This is human activity that has been accelerated mostly on the industrialization and the advancement of our country, of the United States and Western Europe. It is our privilege, our greed, our way of life that has created this. And if you think about how we're going to survive it, we're going to have to look to black folks and ask, how do you survive? This is when the knowledge from the hood and the knowledge from the ghetto and the knowledge from the streets, this is when this is going to play out. Because we're going to have to figure out how to survive something we've never had to think about before. I think about the power of black people, not just because of what we survived, but because of the way we innovate, the way we create. I mean, look at us, y'all. I mean, we already cute.
Absolutely beautiful.
We already cute.
Absolutely
we
beautiful.
We just cute out here up in Brooklyn. And this is black joy. This is black creativity. Black joy and black creativity are going to be the cornerstones of climate solutions. And if we can get that through all of these politicians' heads, then we can actually get somewhere. We're going to have to look to the people who have survived to survive this global event, this moment that we have never seen before, and if we don't get moving on it, we will never see again.
You just heard something really powerful here, and I just want to take a moment to go back to it. Black joy and black creativity are going to be the cornerstones of the change that we need to see for climate justice. So to wrap up this conversation here, I think both of you touched on something that I think is really important for us to talk about, which is black joy and resilience amidst these challenges. So Mike, I want to ask you, where are we seeing black joy and black resilience as we push for climate justice?
Thanks. I'm going to build a little bit off of what Colette said about black culture and how powerful it is. Like, our culture literally powers the globe. Like, you look at things like K-pop, that is black culture. And you look at the Renaissance World Tour. I mean, I love Renaissance, I love house music, but I really think one of the most striking things to me is that movement, that music, ballroom, comes out of our most vulnerable population, which is black trans femmes. And now that is like on a worldwide stage. Like, everyone's singing, and everyone, you know, not everyone, but like everyone loves Beyonce, pretty much. We're not gonna get into the capitalism, but everyone loves her music. It's so popular, and that is like music from people that are being downtrodden, are being murdered, are the most vulnerable. And if we can use that power, like our cultural power, to push climate solutions that are actual solutions that bring people together and don't divide them, I think that would be great. So like that's one of the ways I see it.
Thank you so much. And Colette, you started mentioning it, but quickly tell us, are there any specific examples of black joy that you've been seeing as we wrap here?
Yeah, I mean, I see black joy every day, right? Black folks actually got the courage to walk out of the house and try it again. And I just want to acknowledge how hard it is to be black in America. And this climate crisis has a real foot on the neck of a lot of people on the front lines. And I see those folks fighting. I see black joy as folks are fighting in Cancer Alley in Louisiana. I see black joy as folks are fighting against Cop City in Atlanta. I see resistance in the form of laughter and joy and music and dance. And I think that that's what we have to offer. And I do want to mention capitalism since we brought it up. I mean, black folks, it's one thing for people to take our culture and commodify it. It's another thing for us to sell out for the money. Right now, what we need to do is preserve our culture. Don't give it to the highest bidder. Give it to the communities that need to be restored. Bring yourself to the places that need innovation and creativity. Right now, our people are hurting, and we've got a really bad situation coming our way. We don't have to sell out. As Sharon Levine in Cancer Alley says, our health is our wealth. Our people are our power. That's where we need to go to. Don't let this money fool you. When the climate disaster hits you, the money has no value. The ATMs go down and the banks shut down, but the people are there. And if your people are networked, well-resourced, and have some sort of understanding of how their creativity can bring in their joy, then we can survive, and hopefully we can thrive.
Survive and thrive, and our culture and creativity is literally going to be the cornerstone of change. I want to thank Mike Harrington and Colette Pichon-Battle for joining me for this important conversation. Once again, I am Melissa Noel, News and Politics Editor at Essence. Such a pleasure to have this conversation with each of you on stage today, and thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you so much to each of you out there. We appreciate you.